This is the new SEC.
Welcome to the new SEC podcast. I'm Randall Ledet Jr. We got Hunter Zeisman here. This is the Week 9 recap. We have completed over 9 weeks of football, and this week did not disappoint across the country and in the SEC. We got to see Alabama play and look good. We got to see Auburn get their first SEC win. We got to see an electric performance by Marcel once again, stepping into the starting role in the second half and dominating. And just Taylen Green, historic game as well. Across the country, Pitt won. Miami was able to win. A lot going on, but this is the new SEC podcast. Hunter, welcome everyone in. Tell us all about this week.
Yeah, new number one in the SEC, Texas A&M taking that sole ownership of the only in-conference undefeated team in the SEC. So I think that's kind of the story of the week, right? Like across the board, it was a good week for football. It was pretty scratch. Like a lot of the favorites ended up winning the games.
Yeah,
SEC and out. But, we got to see, like you mentioned, career game from Taylen Green. Marcel come in, kind of take over that QB1 job. We're going to break that more in depth this episode. But we're starting to get a picture of the playoffs, which we're going to talk more about that too. And I think that's what's exciting is now knowing what teams need to happen and what teams want to see happen based on how, what's happened these past 9 weeks.
absolutely. And we're already having playoff talks and playoff discussions, and the college football playoff rankings haven't even come out yet. If anybody told you that an expanded playoffs will be bad for college football, they were a complete liar. Like this is the best time of the year. We got 4 games left, across multiple team schedules, and we're sitting here trying to decide what are the scenarios, who gets in. And so we got a jam-packed episode for you this week. It's going to be really good. We got our new SEC Dawg of the Week. We have our SEC QB wide receiver duo power ranking. So Hunter, tell the fans and listeners a little more about that segment.
Yeah. So we were looking a little bit about quarterback power rankings or wide receiver power rankings, and one really can't live without the other. So we looked at, okay, what duo right now is the top in the SEC, right? Like what quarterback and wide receiver duo is making waves? And when we were breaking this out, we were looking at a couple things from a criteria standpoint. I think the biggest one was their connection, their stats, the consistency. And Randall, you brought up a good point, and it's like the game-winning plays or game-breaking plays. And I think that kind of separated a few for us. And, pulling up the rankings here, I think you got to start at the top with who the top dog is, and that's Jackson Dart and Trey Harris.
Yeah.
He's leading the SEC in receiving yards by a margin. So I think it's only right to have them at the top. And there's probably a couple people that though could have competed for that number one spot.
We look at the rankings here, not just having recency bias, but Taylen Green and Armstrong both had good games on Saturday. Taylen Green 5 touchdowns in the air. I think the recency bias kind of hurts Nussmeier and Lacey. Kyron Lacey from Thibodaux, Louisiana. He's having a really good season, and Nussmeier, he's every game he throws about a touchdown or two. He also throws a good amount of turnovers, but from a connection standpoint, it's undeniable that they are hands down the second best QB wide receiver combo in the SEC. Multiple games with multiple touchdowns, and so it was a toss up. But Trey Harris is in a league of his own.
Yeah. I think that those top 3. I mean, people might be weird to see Taylen Green up there. There should be some other guys in that spot, but I think that those are the top 3 duos. 2 that are interesting that we can talk about in tandem, and that's Jalen Milroe and Ryan Williams, and then Peyton Thorne and Keandre Lambert-Smith. I think that they both need to be talked about in the same light because Williams and Lambert-Smith right now are leading the SEC in touchdowns at 7 apiece.
Yeah.
I think both people might look at Milroe and Thorne and like, these are 2 guys that aren't playing the best football from the quarterback position, but clearly they have a good connection with these receivers. Thorne's interceptions and the turnovers that he struggled with have him down a little bit.
Yeah.
But both of those, they have a good connection.
Definitely a good connection, right? And you see that connection in big plays. Keandre Lambert-Smith has had multiple, 30-plus yard receptions, a couple 30-plus yard touchdowns this season. We've seen it from Ryan Williams being able to stretch the field. Even in games that he doesn't necessarily score, we saw it, last week for Alabama having that, one of those big 30-yard passes against Missouri. Both have 7 touchdowns, I think, on the season, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Right. And so the difference is, of course, Alabama 6-2. They're playing winning football. Auburn is playing competitive football, not winning football right now. But Lambert-Smith is not an issue on their offense, and he's he would be a very valuable asset to a lot of teams in the SEC given his abilities.
Yeah, for sure. And these are the two guys from a wide receiver one standpoint, Williams and Lambert Smith, that are kind of leading the wide receiver one yards per reception. They're guys that get open downfield. And I think that tells a story of what a receiver's connection is with his quarterback when they can air out those long balls. Elijah Badger, right kind of there in that same conversation of a downfield threat.
Yep, definitely right there. And when we talk about Elijah Badger and Lagway, I think where they're kind of behind just on this list is the time playing together, right? I think Lagway's only played 1 or 2 starts since his second time going into the starting lineup, but Badger's been a really huge piece for their success. There's definitely a connection there, and both these guys are under their sophomore year with Lagway being a freshman. So a lot of exciting football to come ahead for them.
Yeah. Back up to the top of the list, like Pavia and Van Buren and Coleman Jr. I think I had Pavia initially lower on the list, and you wanted him bumped up, and it's because of his impact on the team and where Vanderbilt would be without this duo, the transfer duo from New Mexico. Their time there definitely shows with their connection. And I'll call a little disclaimer that we know Stowers is technically a tight end. He's the leading receiver there. He's the guy who's making things happen. Like, he's pretty high up there on the receptions list for wide receivers and tight ends together. They've been playing winning football as a duo and kind of carrying the weight of the offense.
Definitely. And, something that stands out to me from the top 3 compared to the Pavia Stowers combination is the top 3 quarterbacks are also leading the SEC in attempted passes. Nussmeier, I think, had 50 pass attempts last game. Armstrong or Green's routinely over 40. Pavia is probably throwing the ball about 15 to 22 times a game. It's an offense built more to run, but when he does need a big play, that's where Stowers comes in. In this era of transfer quarterbacks and transfer athletes, I think this should be a good story to tell of, maybe go to the same school with your receiver or with your tight end to continue that chemistry and just kind of that flow. And when we talked about the criteria, winning football to me trumps it, right? Lambert and Thorne would be a lot higher if they're winning games. Pavia and Stowers are making plays when it matters. We saw it against Bama. We saw it a little bit in the game against Texas this most recent week.
Yeah.
And so it's a strong combo. It's a combo that's put Vanderbilt clearly in that rank spot at the time, and now, of course, still receiving votes.
Yeah, definitely. And right below them, Ewers is not playing his best football of what he's capable to right now. And, Bond is one of his many targets. You mentioned a trio there from, adding the tight end there. They have 4 in the top 28 on receiving yards. So they have a bunch of guys kind of lower on the tier list. Not that stats are everything,
right,
but the connection, the offense early in games, it doesn't feel like the connection is completely there. From a threatening duo, yeah, he's got 4 touchdowns. Like, I just think that they're in the upper half, but until the connection is stronger between them, that's kind of where they sit for me.
In a way, like in a isolated scenario, Van Buren and Coleman Jr. kind of scare me a little bit more, given their most recent performances in the last 2 games. I think Van Buren's had about 8 touchdowns the last 3 games. Like, he only had 3 the most previous 2 games, and Coleman is just about scored every game this season. He had 100 receiving yards last week, and a lot of times they're playing from behind, but it's his game control and his abilities, right? He had like a 20-yard run or pass reception for a touchdown just from a regular, throw straight to the side, and he just takes it upfield. And that's kind of been Ewers' game, that like short pass to long touchdown. Something that you had talked to me a little bit before we talked about this episode.
Yeah, he's last in Power 4 quarterbacks on yards per attempt on depth of target. So he's not throwing the ball deep downfield and not connecting with his receivers in that manner. So yeah, and it's who can take the ball the distance. Coleman Jr. is really great at that. He's actually leading second in the SEC on reception. So he's getting those passes. He's 4th in yards. Yeah. People may be shocked, and we're going to get some hate for putting them as high as they are. But since Van Buren's come into the picture for them with a team that should not be winning games right now, he's at least keeping them in there with the offense that he's putting on display. So I'd say that the connection between them is what puts them at that spot.
Definitely. So, and before we kind of get to the second half of this rankings, when the season started, everyone was talking about Dart Harris, Cook, Burden. Burden was in that SEC receiver of the year Ryan Williams was starting to build some hype as that up and coming freshman. Cole Coleman was in that discussion for Auburn. From the season starting to now, is there anybody on this list that surprises you where we placed them?
Yeah, I would say a surprising one for me would probably be Green Armstrong. Just at the beginning, because of thinking at how much I expected this offense to run. I knew that they were going to be shifting a little bit away from the Arkansas run team we'd seen in years past, but knowing Taylen Green's strengths, Quentin Jackson's strengths, Armstrong only has 1 touchdown on the year. But he's been a great critical piece to this team. From a shocking on the other side, I'd say it's, Beck and Smith right now of where we have them, and that might shock other people too.
Yeah, and Beck and Smith is definitely surprising. It was obviously overly discussed about what they were going to do at the wide receiver position. Smith has kind of emerged as one of the top guys. Lovett has been kind of vying to be that guy, but Smith has been the one leading the way, I believe, in yards. But there's more to be desired there with that connection.
Yeah, there is. And we talked about it a couple weeks ago, and the placings changed, and I don't have that available. But, Arian Smith had 6 drops in 3 games from Carson Beck, and that lack of connection kind of hurt them. And that was part of that was the Alabama game. Right. So not having that clear target to go to that, is super consistent, like what Bowers was, like what McConkey was. It feels like Beck has made some ill-advised throws at times because of his receiving core and maybe not being the playmaking guys that he was seeing in years past. Now, I think that they could be way higher on this list down the stretch.
It's not even a feeling, Carson Beck right now he's second to first in the SEC when it comes to interceptions. Behind him is I want to say it's Nussmeier. So, obviously he's completing passes, but a lot of times when he's not, they're for interceptions. He doesn't have the same type of weapons. But it's interesting because while he's 12th in our power rankings, I'm not saying that Carson Beck is not a better quarterback than Brock Vandagriff or Brady Cook. That's another discussion for another day. But as a team, Georgia is still top 10, right? So it doesn't fully necessarily correlate to the team success, how good the team is. It just does this duo threaten or scare defenses, right? I would say we're more scared of Milroe Williams compared to Beck Smith.
Yes.
I'm a little more concerned about Lagway Badger with what we've seen from Florida in the last couple of weeks. The offense continued to improve. The defense showed a little bit better from that standpoint. 13 shouldn't come as a surprise either for, whether it's Tennessee fans or, college football watchers. I am a leave-in. I butcher his last name sometimes, but Nico, this connection is shown to make big plays when it mattered, right? We saw it a little bit in the Arkansas game, even though they lost. We saw it in the Alabama game, but it just hasn't been consistent. And so to be at the top, you got to be consistent. It's anything you do, football or this podcast. But that's kind of where the connection for Tennessee is it's bottom 4 in the conference.
Yeah, and I'd say that paints the picture for a lot of these ones at the end here. Or middle to the end is the connection and consistency of finding the receiver. Nico's overthrown a ton of balls, missed target. Like, he just doesn't seem like he's in rhythm. I'd say that's a similar thing from Cook and Burden. And like you mentioned with Beck and Smith, I think that Burden and Key's abilities is what puts them higher than the Beck-Smith duo. I do think that Beck is a better quarterback than Vandagriff and Brady Cook. So let that be known.
And for Burden, he's getting double teamed a lot in these games as well. Like I talked about it earlier. Still, you still should find a way to get the ball to him. You got Theo Weeks on the other side, so that should be your Chad Johnson to your TJ Hushmazada in some ways. But it has affected his production this year and their connection.
Yeah, right now Theo Weeks only 3 less receptions than Luther Burden, but more yards by about 30. So he's finding them in equal ways, whereas you have this guy like Luther Burden, probably, one of the best receivers in college football, and just not making full use of him. And it could be that, safety help and all of that.
Yeah.
Rounding this out here, there's a pretty good story to tell in all of these. Marcel Reed this past week, you could say he should be way higher on this list, but from a duo standpoint, he's a guy who's not expected to throw the ball often. He came in, only threw twice this past week. Noah Thomas, what this duo brings, I would say that from a QB wide receiver duo, they're not bringing a whole lot to the table, which is why they're last. They bring a lot in other ways. Same with Sellers and Bennett as well.
Yep. Yeah, the Sellers Bennett one. That's I think it's youth. It's in this age of college football, we're expecting quarterbacks to step in and automatically be good to go. It's not the case, right? Sellers is a first year starter. Arnold's a first year starter. Reed's a first year starter. He's in his game, like you said, is more dynamic on the ground. At number 13, we got a 5-star recruit. Starting for Tennessee, so it's just a little bit different scenario when it comes to plug and play. But with Reed, they're still playing winning football. They're last in the power rankings, but they're first in the SEC. And I think a rational fan would agree with that from a quarterback perspective. Again, still rather have him than maybe someone from another team. I feel like I always pick on certain teams for quarterbacks I wouldn't want or do want, but he's ahead of a lot of people from a winning football perspective, but just from a pure passing, from what we've seen, not his abilities, need to see more.
Yeah. And last one here, Jackson Arnold, Deion Burks. In another world, another life somewhere, they would be way higher on this list. The year just hasn't played out the way that Oklahoma wanted with injuries. I mean, Deion Burks hasn't been close to healthy this entire season, missing games as well, and he's still their leading receiver aside from the tight end there getting some love. And it's been bad O-line play, quarterback mishap, switching out, putting Hawkins Jr. in there. Jackson Arnold now coming back to the helm, which we're going to talk more in depth in the full episode here. But from availability is really why they're low. In a healthy world, O-line blocking, offense firing, and the defense doing what they've been doing, they would definitely be a higher duo, just availability and consistency.
Definitely. Which duo to you is the biggest threat, and which one's the biggest liability out of the championship contending teams?
I think it's almost dual threat where it's the same team for both answers. Like I think Nussmeier and Lacey are the biggest they are the biggest liability, knowing what Nussmeier can do, in throwing interceptions and, maybe not finding his guys in key games. Like we saw some struggles there against Texas A&M, but I think they're also the biggest threat because we have seen what they were able to do, like against Ole Miss, coming down the stretch of the game, and Lacey getting some help from the other receivers there on that team. So I think that I have them kind of in that same bucket. Who do you have as the biggest threat and biggest liability?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest threats would be Arkansas. I think they have the ability to kind of play spoiler in some of these games in the upcoming season versus Texas and their defense. Another strong offense that Texas's defense will have to face. The biggest liability, I would say, it would be Ewers and Bond. Just same story as Nussmeier, just the turnovers. He's had a turnover, I think, in about over 2/3 of his games this season. 5 over the last 3 weeks. And so that could be a liability, but with the weapons around him, he's able to overcome that, right? You can get Gunnar Helm involved. He's kind of your safety blanket. You can get Matthew Golden involved. He got his first touchdown since week 2 this season in the air, and obviously he's played a key role in the punt return game. But there's enough around Ewers to kind of overcome some of those setbacks. But against championship teams, we'll talk about it in the Texas segment as well. Like it could play a role in making these games closer for Texas than they might like them to be.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree with you. It'll be interesting to see the trajectory of Texas, whether it's kind of the same from Ewers or if there's some improvement over the last stretch of games here that they need to get to the SEC championship. So that kind of wraps the power rankings. Anyone listening here, let us know what you think. If you think any of these are just way out of order, who are your top 3?
Yeah.
Who are your bottom 3? Let us know where we might have missed, and looking forward to hearing the response there.
All right, so we're doing the new SEC podcast, Dog of the Week. This is our second week doing this. We did a community poll on the post tab. So if you subscribe to our page, if you're not subscribed. If you are subscribed, check out the post tab. We'll put questions each week about the upcoming week, the MVP of the week. And the fans voted Marcel Reed. I think it was a whopping 77%. From the new SEC podcast, Hunter and I, we voted for Jarquez Hunter, running back from Auburn. He had over 278 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground, and just gashed up this Kentucky defense that has been noted to be really impressive. Just an unreal rushing performance this week, and Auburn was able to notch their first win. So, Dog of the Week, Jarquez Hunter out of Auburn. Big win for War Eagle Nation there. All right, and so we talked a little bit about the SEC quarterback wide receiver duos. We talked about the Dog of the Week. Week 9, just a lot of football across the nation that was rock chalk and also shook up the playoff potential standings.
Yeah.
ACC, Big 10, Big 12, ACC, the SEC had some winners and losers. What stood out to you this week from outside the SEC?
Yeah, outside the SEC, I think the biggest one was Notre Dame and Navy because of Navy trying to take a spot there in the playoffs, and Notre Dame, having that NIU loss, a loss here would have been detrimental. They would have been done for the year if they would have lost this game. So Notre Dame coming in and not only winning but taking care of business, I think is huge for them being able to make that push in a playoff bracket that's so heavily inspired by winning your conference, and they don't have that ability to do it. They need to have games like this where they win ranked games handedly.
Yep, absolutely. That was a really big win for Navy, and for Boise State, it kind of strengthens their positioning when it comes to that Group of 5 spot. Navy's going to have a couple tougher games coming up, and they play Army at the end of the season, who's also ranked. But for Boise, big win for them going against UNLV.
Yeah.
I think for me, a big game that stood out this week was Indiana continuing to win, taking down Washington, where College Game Day went this past week. Now they're in a position where they have Michigan State, Michigan, and Ohio State and Purdue left. And they're currently sitting in the top 2 in the Big Ten. So if they beat Ohio State, the Hoosiers could be going to Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship.
Yeah. Yeah. The Big Ten is kind of crazy all over, really. Like, Oregon taking care of business, Ohio State taking care of business, after that loss, Penn State in a game that I thought that Wisconsin had a shot at, Penn State having that late surge to win. The Big Ten is going to be interesting. I think the SEC is going to be interesting. The Big Ten is going to be interesting too.
Yeah, I want to double click inside Ohio State game. I feel like this game in some ways exposed some challenges for Ohio State. It was a little bit of a fraud type watch scenario. Will Howard played well, 3 touchdowns. But the duo between Quinshon Judkins and Trayvon Henderson had less than 60 yards.
Yeah.
So when you start playing, better defenses, this could be a challenge, right? They've only played Nebraska, Oregon, Iowa, Michigan State, Marshall, Akron, and Western Michigan. Like, there's not really many tough teams on that schedule. This was one of their tougher games, and they won close, but they're afforded that.
Tough to a degree. I mean, Nebraska got smoked last week, and then Ohio State couldn't take care of business. Right. They took care of business, but they couldn't do what happened in Nebraska last week. So Ohio State, I don't know. They've had one tough game this year, and it was Oregon, and they lost. Yeah. And then they played Nebraska, which I guess is in the tougher games for them, and they played fine.
Right.
So fraud watch.
Fraud watch. I only say it. I'm always, typically glass half full on here, but when you see what Indiana did against Nebraska last week, and then you see what Ohio State did, it raises some concerns with this, massive NIL roster that they've compiled here. Moving on to the Big 12, BYU was able to win against UCF. The AP voters are not super privy to the Big 12. They dropped Iowa State on a bye week. I think BYU is ranked underneath Notre Dame, even though they're undefeated, right? Yeah. So that's kind of interesting. My alma mater, Houston, was able to get their second Big 12 win against Utah. And so from the Big 12, it's like people thought that Oklahoma State would be good. They're not. People thought that Arizona would be good. They're not. Utah, not good. The top 4 ranked teams are, Iowa State, BYU, Colorado just recently joined the rankings, and then and there was one other team I'm forgetting here, but there's 4 ranked teams, right? Kansas State, BYU, Iowa State, and Colorado. Those are the 4, and so it's still a kind of a fight for the top, but not getting the same shine as the Miamis and the Clemsons from the ACC.
It's not. And speaking of ACC, if we got any ACC fans on here, I don't know how y'all boys are letting SMU come into the conference and start trying to maybe run things like 7-1, 4-0 in conference play after beating Duke in a 1-point game on a field goal there, or Duke missing the field goal. Right. It's crazy that SMU is able to do that in the ACC, but they're still ran by Clemson in Miami.
Yeah, you have to be on Eastern Standard Time Zone to win the SEC or to win the ACC. Clemson's obviously on that. Miami in Florida is on that. SMU's in the Central Time Zone. They added Cal, they added Stanford. They're not really doing much of anything, but That is crazy that SMU is doing it. And, Duke had a chance to close it out. The kick was blocked in the fourth quarter. Really unfortunate situation for Duke. And SMU is able to kind of get out there squeaky clean with a win. So,
Yeah.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah. And then looking at the best conference, SEC, bunch of heavy games this week, picking out the winners, Texas A&M, Alabama, Ole Miss, Auburn, and Arkansas, 6 big games there. Curious which winner was the big winner in your book? Like, who was the one that impressed you the most from the winners?
Yeah, it's like every week in and out. I keep getting more impressed by Texas A&M. They have these tests. They show up. They dominate. The test against Missouri, they did it first. Before Alabama. This test against LSU, like just the way they came out in the second half and played a complete football game, puts them leaps and shoulders in my mind of one of the most impressive wins of this week.
Yeah, I think that they have to take that. I mean, Texas in a close one, Alabama against a roughed up Missouri team. Ole Miss, I don't think, didn't cover. They didn't look maybe the most impressive against an Oklahoma team that everyone's been having fun beating up on.
Yeah.
Arkansas, I'd say I'd be impressed with them, even though it was Mississippi State. Seeing what Taylen Green did out there and seeing this team fire even without their maybe best offensive player in Jaquindon Jackson, I might put them up there as my number 2. I think A&M is still number 1 for me, though.
Yeah, I would agree with that order. I would say I'd put Arkansas at 2. Always good to have on your resume some of these games where you can dominate. I think Alabama got their first in conference domination game. A little bit of Brady Cook, a little bit of Drew Pine, whole lot of defense. Seen a whole lot of red, right?
Yeah.
So I'd put them at 3rd, but those are probably the ones that impressed the most. I wish the committee would give more respect to Vandy. Dropping from the rankings in a close loss like that. Vandy's proven week in and week out they obviously are a competitive football team. And obviously you have to keep Missouri at 25 because they beat Vandy, but at a certain point, like we need to put some respect on Vanderbilt's name until otherwise noted.
If Missouri was 3-loss, Vandy now 3 losses, I think that they would do something similar to like when it was Alabama and Georgia at 1 loss and they had Georgia higher just because of the impressiveness of how they've looked. And I think Vanderbilt, they've looked solid. Their season's not done.
No,
they're going to make a bowl likely, and they still have chances ahead of them to win games. So yeah, it's unfortunate that they're out because as an Alabama fan, I wanted Vanderbilt to stay ranked. It helps us out.
I figured they would have kept Navy ranked to help Notre Dame's resume, but the CFP rankings haven't come out yet, so maybe we'll see Navy crop back in there. I know we're on the SEC, but same principle of ranked losses, having ranked teams playing a tough schedule. On the loser's side, Vandy, LSU, Mizzou, Oklahoma, Mississippi State, and Kentucky. Vandy close loss. LSU still has an opportunity to make the conference championship game, and we have that as one of our stories of the day for this episode. Mizzou's still sitting there at 25. We're going to be talking about Oklahoma this week a little bit as well. So it was a good week of SEC football. I think all the favorites won. I want to say I went 5-0 with my picks or 6-0, so I'm happy about that.
All right. Yeah, because you had A&M. I think I had LSU.
I picked Auburn. That was probably that was probably the swing game right there.
I had Kentucky there.
Yeah.
Man, yeah, you did pretty good.
I did all right. I'm always highlight the weeks I do well versus the ones I don't.
Yeah.
So fun week of football. Really good week. Week 10 is going to be even better. And we'll have some previews coming out here later this week for everyone listening to this particular segment. And so this week, we wanted to kind of cover some of the top headlines. Every Sunday, Hunter and I kind of collaborate and we talk about football and we say, okay, what stood out this week? And then we also have a segment featured from our survey that we put on the community post page talking about what you would want to hear as listeners of this show. And so we have a special segment talking about Texas and if we think they're still a national championship contender. But we're going to start off with the big game of the week and a segment from that game, that night game, College Station. The 12th man was rocking. It's a real deal thing. It's so loud in there. And Marcel Reed came in the second half and absolutely just, showed out in the College Station under the bright lights. And so the question was, Marcel Reed's back at QB1. Should he be the starter this week? We don't know if they've officially announced that yet, but should he be the starter for A&M after that performance and what we've seen this season?
Yeah, and you mentioned it's not announced yet, and Elko's still kind of cryptic in his response to that. He's like, we're happy with what Marcel Reed did when he came into the game. Looking at what happened in this game, 7-17, LSU was winning, and then Marcel Reed came in and punched in the touchdown coming off of that turnover. So, he brought a new life to this team, even though he barely threw the ball. He threw the ball twice, 2 completions there. He brings something different to this team. And a couple weeks ago when we were saying, is Weigman going to come back? What should they do with Weigman? I think it was in the Missouri game. We were saying, you got to play with Marcel Reed. You got to start Marcel Reed because he's done nothing but win with this team. Yep. And right now, that's kind of what he's doing is he's winning with this team, playing a unique style of football that I think not a lot of teams are prepared for and is working just across college football as a whole.
Yeah, it's working across college football as a whole. And I think, he only threw 2 passes, and it's like he hasn't shown you that he can't pass. They just don't use him that way. This game particularly, they started off with 7 punts. They had 1 touchdown in the first half by Le'Veon Moss. He's going to get his per usual, right? The second half, you bring in Marcel Reed. He has 3 of the 4 touchdowns. The rest is history. To me, Marcel Reed has to be the primary option with you subbing in Weigman to mix up the passing protection looks. But Reed is clearly your primary guy. Like, I think that to me, there's not much of a debate here. I have a ton of points proving why, but I think you mix in Connor Weigman to kind of change how the DBs play, how the defensive line plays, maybe keep some of these teams honest, just from like a confidence standpoint for him as well. Because he hasn't done necessarily anything to lose the job, but it's like it's clear as day. Reed on the field offers something in addition with his feet that Weigman doesn't. He has double the carries on the season, from 25 to 50 plus, right? That's hard to know that's on your bench and you're not using it.
Yeah, and like he can throw the ball, like you mentioned, against Florida, against Bowling Green. He threw the ball and did it well enough to win them those games. But they're running the ball 63% of the time, and there's nothing saying that you just can't be a running team. Like, it's working for teams that want to run. I was looking a little bit deeper, and teams that run over 60% of the time are 73-39 right now. So it's winning football if you just decide to commit to running. Like, it works for the service academies. Not saying you need to I get my weekly service academy shout out. He's only got 1 turnover on the year. If they design the game of football around him, which it seems like they have the playbook established in that way when he comes into games, it'll work against the teams that they're playing. Now, they do have tough defenses ahead. They play South Carolina, Texas, and Auburn. South Carolina, they might be better off running against, given what they can do from a pass rush standpoint. But Texas and Auburn, it'll be interesting to see if this run first and run often approach works.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting. It clearly is their game, right? Last game they had Amari Daniels. He got 91 yards. He got his. Le'Veon Moss had 83 yards, 2 tutties. Marcel Reed got 3 touchdowns. I mean, that was the formula. Like, put the ball on the ground. And it's like I said, just statistically, Connor Weigman, one of his bigger games this season, he didn't have any touchdowns against Missouri. He played a good game. Over 150 passing yards. It's not like it's showing that he is throwing a significant amount more in terms of touchdowns, and he is throwing more interceptions. Reed has 4 multi-touchdown games to Connor Weigman's 2. Connor Weigman has a slightly higher completion percentage, but he doesn't have a better quarterback rating. He doesn't have a better, just statistically, he's not there despite playing only, 1 or 2 less games on the season. And so I'm looking at results versus ability. I feel like I'm seeing the results from Reed. I'm seeing some results from Weigman. I know they both have the ability, but one of the abilities that's clear as day that Weigman doesn't have is Reed's running dynamic, which is really big for them this season.
Yeah, and so the question: do I think he's the QB1? Do I think he's the starter? Yes, I do think so. I don't think this is the end of Weigman's season at Texas A&M. I think we'll see him again in games, like to your point. Whether he comes in when they need a passing attack or whether he gets, they have this dual package or something. I do think that we see him again because there is talent there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Marcel Reed is QB1. Thought it all along. I stand by Marcel Reed.
Oh, hey, we did talk about this. We had a segment a couple weeks ago, and we both said Marcel Reed's the guy. He was the hot hand, and you brought him back in. He got hot. And look, you have 2 good quarterbacks. You're winning football games. So for A&M, it's a great situation. Gig them. So, the next segment we wanted to talk about was the Arkansas game and the career day for Taylen Green. 6 touchdowns, 5 in the air. This is the second 4-touchdown game of the season, so he's legit. He's certified by me, if that means anything. So, Hunter, Mississippi State, he went to work against them. What are your thoughts on Taylen Green, this guy from Boise State turning up in the SEC now?
Man, we are we're Woo Pig adjacent over here. We like the Arkansas teams. I'll own that I might have doubted them a little bit last week with Jaquin and Jackson out. I was like, will Taylen Green be able to handle this workload? We knew Braylon Russell was good, and shout out to him, freshman of the week in the SEC. But Taylen Green did his thing. What do you make of it? It's the improvement that Taylen Green's shown over the season. When it started out, he had 5 games. The first 5 games of the season, he was throwing 49%, 4 touchdowns, 4 picks. In the last 3 games, mind you, it's against LSU, Tennessee, and Mississippi State, 3 teams that are good. Mississippi State, one of these is not like the other, but he's throwing over 72%, 6 touchdowns and 2 picks. He's gotten so much better and more comfortable with this team.
He's gotten really comfortable, and you talked about those last couple of games completion percentage-wise. I'm looking at it from a yard standpoint. Earlier in our segment, I talked about the amount of passing attempts. Like, they have him chucking the ball throughout the game, in addition to his running abilities. But the last couple of games, ranked LSU, lost 240 yards, ranked A&M 270 yards, win against a ranked Tennessee 266 yards, and then this week 314 yards. I mean, he is going off. And so he's making a significant leap. Like, my notes say that right now, Arkansas has a dog at quarterback. They have someone that you can build upon for this season and next season. He's still pretty young. And there's something that you should be feeling really good about with what he's able to do against inferior opponents and then against good opponents like Tennessee, which we've seen in the weeks past. Yeah.
Yeah. And we knew what an improviser he was. When he can get out of the pocket, extend plays, he's done it week in and week out. This game, he showed a lot more comfortability sitting in the pocket and completing passes, which is really dangerous for teams. But on the other side, when you flush him out, I think the biggest step forward from this team is the tight end capabilities that they showed in this game, getting the tight ends involved. We see it with Vanderbilt, and you see it with teams in general. When teams have a mobile quarterback, there's an extra opportunity out there to connect with your tight ends. They're often going to be guarded by a linebacker or a safety who's going to have to make a decision. Do I peel out and go get this quarterback, or do I stick with my guy, my zone here in the middle? He found his tight ends often. They accounted for 4 touchdowns in the game, often wide open. So knowing that he's built that hasn't been here this season for them. So now that this is coming through, he's sitting in the pocket. When he does get out of the pocket, he's finding his guys. They're dangerous. They're dangerous with him at the helm.
They're definitely really dangerous. I mean, just like statistically, you talk about him getting those tight ends involved. I think he had 2 tight ends, had 2 touchdowns last week. He's sitting at 23rd in the nation in yards, 3rd in the SEC, over 2,000 yards. KJ Jefferson, who we are good at Woo Pig Sooie Nation. We being the Arkansas fans and myself here on the new SC podcast, but he is absolutely dominating. The area of opportunity, of course, is cleaning up the interceptions. That's kind of been a struggle for a lot of quarterbacks in the SEC. I think he's got about 6 on the year, but just from a yards perspective, and we're not even really touching on what he does on the ground all the way. I mean, he's averaging 9.9 yards a carry. You saw that the one rush he had in the game where he kind of just carved up the field. He's really good at just making slight angles and creating enough separation to kind of, take it down the field all the way. But career day for him. What I make of it, you got to do it at Arkansas. You got a fun schedule coming up with Ole Miss, Texas, and Missouri, and of course Louisiana Tech. Can't forget the Bulldogs that are wrestling Louisiana. But you got a schedule where you can make some noise and win some recruits, win some games, and show what you got this season and going into next season.
Yeah, I mean, this segment sounds like just high praise for Arkansas all the way through, and I'm going to keep it going with this. But I mean, looking at those 4 games, it's very realistic that if he plays well, they should win 2, could win 3, and don't count him out to win all 4.
Wow. Okay.
I'm gonna go on a limb and say it should win 2, could win 3.
Yeah. Right.
The should wins. I'm gonna say Missouri and La Tech could win. Throw Ole Miss in there, but don't count them out against Texas.
Yeah, they've been in every game this season besides LSU. So, you're afforded a bad game or 2, but they've been in every single game this year.
And even then, they were in there for a while and then killed it with momentum. They had some injuries. I'm not giving them, any. I'm not, trying to defend them, the Arkansas team in any way, like with injuries or something like that. But still, like, there was an opportunity there. If they play again, like, I don't know,
Right. Yeah, it's true. It's true. So, career day for him, second 4 touchdown plus game of the season. He had 6 of them bad boys, getting in the end zone, touching Pater. And so, props to Taylen Green. If you're watching this, man, we love you. And so going to our next segment that we're going to run was submitted by one of our subscribers. We had a post asking what you wanted to hear this week in terms of top headlines, and someone suggested and wanted us to talk about, is Texas still a national championship contender? Texas has 1 loss on the season, 1 conference loss against a top Georgia team. They won this week against Vandy, and so they want to know, is Texas still a national championship contender?
Yeah, and I'm going to start out with maybe some negative before I get to the positive here, and thanks to the viewers for submitting the question, and I think it's a good point to bring up, especially after a win. Looking at box score, counting the dub, yeah, it's like Texas is moving on, 1 more win in the column, but they didn't look as strong as they maybe could. Quinn Ewers right now in the last 3 games, 4 picks and 2 fumbles. I mentioned it in the earlier segment, but he has the lowest depth of target from P4 quarterbacks. He's not playing super confident, and unless they beat Texas A&M, this Texas team might not finish with a win over a ranked opponent. That's kind of their last opportunity to get that finishes ranked. So the team doesn't have the resume right now to prove that they're a national championship contender, and they haven't played the style of ball yet to prove that. Although I think that they have every piece in place to make that. I mean, how are you feeling when you look at the team up to this point?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point. Their stats are off the charts, and so 7-1, 3-1 in conference. This is the number 1 pass defense in the country. Yep. I think where they are looking for areas to improve is the turnover issues with Quinn Ewers, 6 on the year, 4 of the last 2 games. But if the season was to end today, just based upon the rankings, not necessarily taking into consideration the full playoff format, they're a 5 seed. They'd play Boise State, and they'd most likely play BYU in the second round. So those 2 rounds get you to the semifinals. You're a game away from the national championship. Do I think Texas is a national championship contender? Absolutely. I think they are in the crop of teams like Tennessee, LSU, and I think they're on a similar or same level as A&M. Their resume might not necessarily prove it, but I think with the way they've won against the opponents they have played has proved to me that they can compete in those type of games. Just from what I've seen from Texas.
Yeah. And again, I feel like I keep prefacing with negative things. I mean, if they lose to A&M, right, and let's say that Alabama wins out, to me, Texas's resume doesn't necessarily say that they're a playoff contender with Georgia, A&M, and I might even put Alabama and Tennessee up there above Texas if they lose to A&M, just because these teams, Alabama and Tennessee, haven't gotten beat up. This Texas team got beat up to Georgia. Now, if I'm looking at the current 12 team, like you were saying, where they would be in that, who am I taking over Texas right now? Georgia, Oregon, Ohio State, maybe are the only 3 that I'm taking over them, but I think Texas could win any of those games.
Absolutely.
I think Texas is better than Penn State. I think they're better than Miami, for sure. I think they're better than Tennessee, better than Notre Dame, better than BYU, Boise State, Iowa State. I like this Texas team better than them in any given Saturday. This Texas team, if they can win, if they can beat A&M, and even if they lose that game, I still think that they might be punching a ticket.
All right.
They're a contender just on the fact of the pieces and the coaching that they have.
Yeah, I think this schedule kind of warrants wanting more style points. We're just getting into the SEC schedule. They beat Mississippi State. They lost to Georgia. They beat Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's good. Mississippi State's not good. Georgia is good. All things considered, they're kind of like, what are we? But we know they're good. We just rattled off a ton of national teams that we believe they're better than. We want to see more from them with this schedule. But if I'm putting my money on it, yeah, I'm picking Texas over a lot of teams, and I 100% think they're a national championship contender. I think Vanderbilt is a good team, and they've proven they're good. This defense, all things considered, statistically, has proven it's top 5 in the nation. You got guys like Jahdae Bird and Anthony Hill. Anthony Hill making a huge contribution when it comes to that defense and making stops against Vanderbilt. And Jahdae Bird got in a pick last game, got 3 on the year, leading the team. And so this defense is very strong. Offense is showing some liability. It's not being heavily discussed. we'll see what that means going forward. I'm not saying Arch is the answer, but something does need to change from a quarterback performance perspective, because when they start playing more competitive teams, they're not going to be able to be afforded those luxuries of recovering. They had 2 turnovers against Vanderbilt, and Vanderbilt wasn't able to capitalize. That might not happen if you're playing a well-coached Boise, potentially if you're the 5 and the 12, or if you're playing a well-coached Oregon. Let's say Oregon doesn't win their conference championship and you play Oregon in the second round. Those are the blockers to a championship contender, not a playoff spot. And so that is, to me, the negativity or the areas of concern for Texas.
Yeah. And if you're Texas, I think it's right to be asking these questions. I think you're looking at the future of the team, and your goal was to make the national championship game and win it when looking at your roster this year. If 3 gets more comfortable out there, I think he's the quarterback for the team. He just needs to open up a little bit more, show some more comfortability and confidence. I mean, we saw what A&M did to Nussmeier last week. That's your next real big test this year to finish out the season is A&M. So use them the weeks to come to show that you are a team that can compete in that game, win that game, get a good spot in the SEC championship game. There are a lot of teams, if you are another SEC team, that you would rather play than Texas in that game. So for writing this question in, yeah, you're still a national championship contender. Do I think that it's the strongest Texas team that they could be at this moment? No, but there's a lot of weeks to happen still to improve.
Yeah, like I'm gonna put you on the spot. So this Texas team right now versus the Texas team that beat Bama last year, who do you like better?
I like this team better.
Defense
I think I like
better.
This team better. Yeah, I think
defense is better.
Better. Yeah. I think the wide receiver room is wide open. I think the running back play is less. The receiving is kind of about equal, I would say. Some people may argue that last year was better. I don't know.
It's hard to replace Jonathan. It's hard to replace Jonathan Brooks at running back. I mean, he's pretty solid, and Bijan the year before. So, I mean, 2 all Big 12 top guys.
I would have taken this team just expecting yours to continue to develop.
Yep, 100%. And so we think they're still national championship contenders. A little bit humbled there against Georgia, and I didn't say it earlier. They did beat Oklahoma, so that was another SEC win for them. In addition to Mississippi State, in addition to Vanderbilt, so 3-1 in conference. It all makes sense, and so we'll see how the rest of the season plays out. It was a great question, and we love to hear more questions like this from our new listeners, our recurring listeners as well. Across the border, north of Texas was Oklahoma. They took on Ole Miss in Oxford, but of course Oklahoma is right above Texas. And right now Oklahoma is 4-4 overall, 1-4 in conference play. Jackson Arnold showed us some signs of he could be the guy again. It was in a loss, but what are our thoughts on Jackson's performance and what it means for OU going forward?
Yeah, and he performed well to the expectations of what Oklahoma has at play. I think that everything that Oklahoma is struggling with offensively is not quarterback centric. It's poor O-line play, tons of injuries around the board. Both Jackson Arnold and Hawkins Jr. are both talented quarterbacks. What Jackson Arnold brought to this game was, and it could have been from, the coordinator changes and him bringing something new to the table, but they had outlets for him. And he was able to find quick passes to people. He still got sacked 10 times, but he was able to get some passes out to the tight ends, quick passes to receivers. Check down game was good. If you're a team with a poor O-line, injured receivers who aren't going to get separation downfield, if you can find that, it's a small win. It's a small win that you just have to kind of ride those out if you're this Oklahoma team.
Absolutely. You got to ride the small wins, right? And you look at this past game, small wins, no turnovers. He got sacked 10 times. The O-line, the struggles have been, outlined all season. 2 TDs, no turnovers, the highest completion total he's had all season with 22 completions. They run him a lot, right? I think he had over 20 carries. Need to see more from Javonte Barnes and Taylor Tatum to kind of help complement what he can do on the ground and what he should be able to do in the air. The game was solid. He's clearly your best option. 10 touchdowns in the season compared to Michael Hawkins' 1 touchdown. Yeah. I think the answer is yes. He's your guy for right now. I did a little digging in terms of the 24/7 ranking. So they have one quarterback committed, senior in high school right now. Hawkins is a freshman. Arnold's a sophomore. So this is kind of where they are right now.
Yeah, you're continuing to develop. He did have one turnover on the game, a fumble on a sack, but it wasn't his fault. It was a free runner at him, and I think that doesn't speak to him at all. I think that speaks to the other issues that are around him with the O-line play. So, yeah, I mean, you got young guys. You're trying to develop them. You keep Venables there. You continue to develop the defense. You bring in a new coordinator for next year who can work with these young quarterbacks. You have a good receiving core if they're healthy.
Yep.
Javonte Barnes, what the team right now as an offense just isn't firing. The defense is good, but they have an opportunity versus Missouri, where Missouri sits. That could be one that from a morale standpoint, winning that game would be huge for this team, keeping players there, keeping recruits there.
Yep.
Yeah.
12th overall recruiting class in the country. Oklahoma's story has always been getting transfer quarterbacks. And so it'll be interesting to see if they let Arnold develop or work with Hawkins, or they get someone in the portal, right? I mean, you have Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Jalen Hurts, Caleb Williams, and Spencer Rattler were guys they brought in-house, but they were both plug-and-play guys for the most part. Spencer for a little bit. Caleb, I mean, he's in the NFL, right? And then you bring in Dylan Gabriel, another plug-and-play guy. In this era of college football, people want to win now. And Jackson Arnold is the guy now. Oklahoma has proven to be a transfer quarterback home and hub. We'll see what this means for the rest of the season and who they might consider going after if it makes sense. And so it's kind of my thoughts there.
It's tough because you're not going to have young guys stick around to develop. For the most part in college football, teams that are winning are doing it behind mostly guys who have played a little bit of ball.
Yeah.
So it will be interesting to see what they do. Jackson Arnold, we mentioned it, I think 2 episodes ago, where he had already kind of talked to the coaching staff about using his redshirt year. And in last week's game, he's like, I'm happy to come in and help if I need it, but it would burn my redshirt freshman year. So he was already having those conversations internally and thinking that way. So it'll be interesting to see, how he has to perform the rest of this year to build confidence in his mind to stay, because I think behind a better O-line with a better team, he would be a good quarterback.
I 100% agree. I mean, I could see him being good on a team like Oregon. He won't necessarily go there, but I could see it.
Future Big Ten quarterback Jackson Arnold.
Maybe in the Big Ten. We'll see. You never know. But he's your guy right now for sure, no doubt. Another topic, one that everyone loves to talk about, Alabama football. Love them or hate them, they're on your mind rent-free. And Alabama was able to get a dominant win against Missouri. Cade Womack, and I always mess up his name. Womack was excited on the sidelines when they're able to lock in that shutout. And so 3 forced turnovers, right?
Yeah.
Just absolute, B-Day game of the week. For people that don't know what that means, belt to ass. And so, Bama, are they back?
Yeah, and I'll put an asterisk beside everything I say because Missouri was beat up. They went down on Brady. Brady Cook out of the game early on in it. Drew Pine played terrible. They ended up going with J.R. Blood, played terrible. So, Nate Noel. So everything, you play the guy in front of you, and Alabama did just that. So do I think Alabama football's back? It's sure starting to feel like it because the things that I know Alabama for were shown on the field. And it's defense that's dominant, take the ball away, get in your face, and make games hard for you to do anything on offense. And that was what Alabama did. On the offensive side of the ball, I like an Alabama team that runs downfield, runs at your face, and they did just that. 282 yards on the ground. Monster runs from the 2 backs. Even Richard Young, the 3rd back in there, came out and broke out a big run.
Yeah.
It feels like a different team, and it really did because of how dominant they were running the ball.
Yep. And one thing the ESPN broadcasters said on the end of the game was they're like, if you look at the schedule, if they go 10-2 with this remaining schedule, they're hosting a playoff game, and I completely agree. So that would coincide with me agreeing that they are back. I had Richard Young in my notes. The halfback, he got him involved. Want to see more of him. They can add this to a big win for them. Wisconsin, Mizzou, Georgia. Some stronger than others from a resume perspective. But right now, defense is looking better. Malachi Moore, he got him a little INT. Offense, they looked mean. When all else fails, they looked like running the football is about being mean, pushing the guy in front of you and falling forward. And this, between Justice Haynes and, obviously,
Jam Miller.
Jam Miller. Yeah, they look solid. They look really solid on the ground. So
yeah, no, they're a solid team, and I think that they'll continue to thrive when the rushing attempts outnumber the passing. 26 passes on the day, 35 rushing attempts, 7 design runs for Milrow. When they're doing that, they're bending teams to their will. They have a good O-line. They have good backs. Nothing feels worse than just getting ran over, in a game because of them just picking up those plays, putting themselves in third and manageables. So do I think they're back? Yeah, but it depends on what you're thinking it's considered towards, because they're always going to be a different team. They're going to be a different team each year, more so under this new staff. The mean identity on defense felt there. It felt reminiscent of past years, the coaching staff getting all fired up and angry. We love to see that.
yeah,
It just needs to keep up against LSU. The playbook's out there for how to beat them. Alabama, though, 127 out of 134 college football teams in penalties per game. That has to sharpen up. It has to sharpen up. It's sad when they get 7 penalties for, over 80 yards, and I'm happy with it because it brings their average down, their average better. It's bad. It's bad discipline.
Yeah, and that's those are the things where if you're asking yourself, are you back? The standard for Alabama has always been an A+. That's not going to help you get an A+. That's, you can still be an A team, but if you're creating penalties, that drops you down to an A, not an A+. Right now, I'd say this team's a 90 overall. In terms of being back this season, I was talking about it, right? Compared to last season, they were 7-1 after 8 games. They only lost to Texas. They had beaten Tennessee and they beat Ole Miss. This Tennessee team they lost this year is significantly better than last year's team, who they beat. This year, they're 6-2, so only one more loss. Vanderbilt's on the schedule. No more SEC West. They played Vandy. Vandy's a completely different team. Tennessee's a really good defensive team. Kind of caught them after that was this was their second hardest game of the season after playing Georgia 2 weeks prior or 2-3 weeks prior, and so the record's only a 1-game difference. I think the attitudes from fans have kind of been based upon the play on the field, but record-wise, you're in the same spot. Last year, they were going into playing LSU. They beat them 42-28. Shocker, this year they're going to play LSU this year, right? And so, all things considered, I would say they're back. And I'm going to make a hot take here. You just got to get past LSU. You got Mercer, Oklahoma, Auburn. That should be a cakewalk. You get past LSU, punch your ticket to the playoffs.
Yeah. If they win that game against LSU, they're just about in. Now, they got to play those games, but if you win those games and you beat LSU, there's even opportunity for this Alabama team to make the SEC championship game. They're plus 3,000 on the books right now to make that game or to win the SEC. So, making that game is a big piece of that. There is some chaos that can happen if they win that game. You're rooting for Ole Miss to beat Georgia that same week. So there's a couple things of chaos that can happen that we can cover in a future segment, but things are looking bright for Alabama. I was looking for some lines. A couple books have some things out there, some early lines for the LSU game. LSU looking like a 1.5 point favorite. Some places we'll see what it comes out officially.
Yeah.
But other than that, you're going to be favored in the rest of the year.
It's gonna be a tough one. I mean, they're going to Death Valley, so that makes it definitely different. And I think the rest of the games for the season are going to be at home. If we have to nitpick on something, Milrow's passing game was not necessarily that impressive last game. So you can look at it in one of two ways. This is a challenge area, or this team can dominate despite the lack of passing. You don't have Missouri's every week on your schedule, and you don't have Missouri's in the playoffs typically. So the jury is out on teams like Missouri, but that's probably my one area of opportunity when it comes to the passing game.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fair. I mean, Milrow not nailing the fundamentals on pass accuracy. We saw what A&M did to beat LSU last week, it was running the ball. So if you can do that effectively, I think they can get past that game.
I think so. And so speaking of LSU, it's our last segment of the day. LSU was not victorious against Texas A&M. This changes their positioning when it comes to their standings in the SEC. They're now sitting at third with one loss. And so the question is, what is LSU's new path to the conference championship game for all our, Go Tigers, Bayou Bengal Nation fans out there? What's their path to the national championship?
Yeah. And for the gamblers out there and even people, just this helps paint the picture of what the likelihood is. Right now, they have the 4th best odds to win the SEC in Vegas at plus 700. UGA and Texas at plus 200 each. A&M ahead of them at plus 400. Tennessee right behind, and then a pretty big drop off. So there's a high likelihood, even with that loss, that you make this game. but it comes really behind one key step, and that's winning out, finishing 10-2, 7-1 in the SEC, and you hold some key wins if you win out. You hold the key win over Ole Miss, and you hold a key win over Alabama. That helps you get to this game. You hold that tiebreaker over Georgia. You're rooting for Georgia if you're LSU. You want Alabama, you want to beat Alabama, and then you want to root for Georgia to win some games. And then your chances, you don't hold your own destiny, but things are looking in your favor.
Yep, definitely. Things are definitely looking in your favor. And from what you can control in your destiny, you got Florida, Vanderbilt, Oklahoma, and Bama. You got Bama at the crib, and you got 3 out of 4 games at home. So, like, you're cooling, right? You just got to beat Bama at home at the crib, and then you got the rest of your games mostly at home. OU could be a tough one.
Yeah.
Florida could be a tough one, but
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, things are in your control. What they now in those games, the turnover bug is consistently hitting us. We saw it against A&M. We saw it against Mississippi State. He's proven now that tough defenses will take the ball from him. He's thrown a pick in just about every Power 4 game this season besides Arkansas and UCLA. And he had 2 against South Alabama. So it's the path is there. It's how do you perform on that path?
Yeah. Yeah, they're going to have to improve on a couple things. The running game needs to stay solid. They are a pass-first team. We know that, but the passing has to be crisp. We can't have the turnovers like, you mentioned from an LSU team if you want to get past Alabama because they have been able to get some takeaways. There's some tough games there. There's a path to them for the playoffs. So this game, while it stings, you did a good job of getting to this point, and you still have a really good path to the playoffs too.
Yeah.
If you lose to Alabama, the playoff is looking slim, but I will say there's still a chance to get to the SEC championship game, even if you lose to Alabama. You need some chaos, but there is a shot. And, I'll put in the description at MRed53 on Twitter has built a pretty good playoff SEC championship game simulator where you put all the games in. So I'll put that in the chat if anyone wants to play around with it and test my theories on them being able to get in with two SEC losses. But there's opportunities.
There's definitely opportunities. I mean, you're rooting for teams like Tennessee to lose. Georgia, you want to win despite both having 1 loss in conference. Teams like Bama are kind of hawking behind you. You have the other 2-loss teams as well behind Alabama, and so, but it's still a relatively clear path for LSU. You didn't lose too badly, I think, in the what I would say would be the voters' eyes to look at this game with a bad black eye feeling. We know what you need to see on the field from the offensive side. Defense has been improving. So we'll see how it all plays out. And so, Hunter, thank you for the plug when it comes to that playoff SEC championship simulation.
Yeah, I played with it for like hours today to try to find all different ways for random teams to get into the game. And there's a lot out there, with the way the SEC tiebreakers work. When we had done the preview at the beginning of the season, we didn't think it was going to go much further than, the first 2 tiebreakers, but it's looking like this year it will be making it down to conference win percentage of opponents as the tiebreaker, looking at teams in the record and win percentage of the teams that they've played in conference. And that's crazy to think about and leads to a lot of chaos where it's hard for us to put some crisp, clear projections, in front of us that show LSU's way in. But control what you can, win the game, and root for Georgia. That's kind of where they're at.
It's kind of where they're at. Every division across the Power 4 moved to no divisions. ACC, SEC, Big 10, Big 12, no divisions. And so you're not going to play every team. And so it is very interesting to kind of see how they work through these tiebreakers. Tennessee's playing Georgia, Bama's playing LSU, LSU's not playing Georgia. It's just a lot of chaos. And so coaching controls, coach says, win the games in front of you. And for LSU, I think this is a good story, even though they lost. Out of conference games, whether they're hard or easy, do not necessarily fully affect your standings in the conference. So schedule tough games out of conference can help you when it comes to the resume for the end of the season.
Definitely. Got to win them.
Got to win them too, though, right? Definitely got to win them. And so that wraps up our episode here. If you like content like this, please subscribe. It takes 2 seconds. Makes it easier for you to find content from the new SEC podcast, game previews, game recaps, interesting segments like the SEC quarterback wide receiver duo. We've done a Heisman talk session. We've done power rankings, defensive power rankings. Anything you guys want to hear, let us know as well. And so please follow and subscribe. Thank you for tuning in to episode 19. I'm Randall Ledet Jr. We got Hunter Zeisman here, and this is a new SEC podcast. Until next time.